Sounds good.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the Dallas Free Lecture Series. I appreciate you all being here, and I want to welcome you. This is a lecture series that is co-hosted by D2 Counseling and Unity Church of Dallas. And it was exactly a year ago this past week that I remember I was sitting watching a Mavericks basketball game, and they cleared the court, and they said that COVID was stopping the NBA. And I thought at that point, boy, this may be bigger than I thought it was going to be. And here we sit a year later, and it has been a big deal. So congratulations to everybody that survived this last year going through that. But as a result, we went to all virtual, both in our therapy and in this lecture series. Now that the vaccine and numbers are starting to improve, I actually had lunch today with a representative from Unity Church, and we're beginning the discussion about what it might look like to go back to putting this lecture live, or what we would probably step into is a hybrid, where people would be able to come and sit in the sanctuary. They've already got it spaced out for their congregation. So it would be safe distancing. Everybody in the congregation would have a mask, and then the speaker would be up on stage 15 feet from everybody else. Then we would also have Zoom available for folks who were unsure about that or who wanted to stay at home for that. So that's in the discussion. I'm hopeful about that. I think there would be a sense of normalcy that comes about, and I frankly am looking for more opportunities to do things in person than I am on Zoom. The Dallas Free Lecture Series was started years ago through the Meadows, who was a trainer of mine. And when it stopped a few years back, there was quite a demand to continue on. So that's when Unity approached D2 Counseling to turn it around, and we do this lecture once a month. I want you to know that we do have CEUs available if that works, if that's of interest to you. And I will post in the chat how to get those CEUs. We'll just ask you to send an email to our office, and we will provide you with CEUs for that. My co-founder, Dr. Dina Hijazi, and I started D2 Counseling to provide a high level of care in the Dallas community. And we do a lot of work around family of origin, but we're all family systems theorists. And what that means is we see the bigger picture as a whole. I know Laney does that work where she sees bigger picture as well. And we do a lot of experiential work, which includes a lot of groups. Laney and I were talking before we got started tonight, and she is starting a Betrayed Partners group that's going to start in April. They're shooting for. That will be on a Tuesday afternoon. At D2 Counseling, we have some existing groups. We do have one group for men, which is in Tuesday evenings, and that group is for men who are, it's about identity development, career growth, relationship stuff that goes that way. And then we're also starting a new men's group that is for men who are active in recovery around sex addiction or any process addiction. And that group is going to meet on Tuesday afternoons. As we go through this, if you come up with a question for Laney, I would invite you to post the question in chat. And then when she gets done, we will have those questions available to us, or you can holler at the end of it next time. And then just a reminder that we do this lecture third Tuesday of every month, and you can go to our website, d2counseling.com or dallasfreelectureseries.com, and sign up to get reminders about this. So with that, I will stop talking, and I will invite Laney Knowlton to introduce herself and take it away.
Thanks, Daniel. So I am Laney Knowlton, and I'm a marriage and family therapist. I work in private practice. My office is in Lewisville. I've been in the field for about a decade, and I specialize in sexual addiction and betrayal trauma. That doesn't mean I don't work with other things. So if you happen to come across somebody that's my client, it doesn't mean that it's revealing any personal information about that. But those are the areas that I specialize in. And like Daniel said, we run groups for betrayed partners, and I also run groups for females who are struggling with sex and love addiction. And we do couples workshops for early, middle, and late recovery from sex and love addiction and betrayal. I think that's about it for me. I grew up in Massachusetts, moved to Texas about 15 years ago, 16 years ago. I have 6 kids, 5 girls and a boy. Boy's number 4, he is not number 6. Those are the questions I usually get asked about my kids. And I am totally open to feedback or questions. Because we're presenting online, I'm going to answer the questions at the end. Just most of the presentations that I've done that have been online, it's been easier to answer the questions at the end because of the delay with the format. So please feel free to type in the questions or write them down and ask me when we're done. I'll make sure we have time at the end for it. And if you need me to repeat something, I guess put it in the chat, send it to Daniel, something. And we'll try to keep up on that. Does that work, Daniel?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So, let's see. My topic is wholehearted healing sexuality after betrayal or abuse. Let's start by defining what healthy sexuality is. Because to be able to heal sexuality, a lot of times it can be, we can not know what we're working towards. We can be confused about it. One of the things I very often hear is that healthy sexuality means having more sex. That is not true. And it also doesn't mean trying more positions. It doesn't mean being willing to do things that you don't feel safe around. It doesn't mean ignoring.
Yeah, I'm doing the CEU now, just learning a little bit.
So healthy sexuality in my book is connection to yourself and your body, and the ability to share that connection within your relationship in ways that allow each person to connect to each other in ways that are safe. Doesn't mean that you're going to be connected to somebody in ways that aren't safe for you. It doesn't mean you have to push yourself to do something that you're not comfortable with. And realize that this process is going to look different for every single person. I'm not quite sure there. As we start, one of the most important things to realize is that every person's body belongs to that person. Nobody else gets to tell you what to do with it. Nobody else gets to tell you what you're supposed to be comfortable with. Nobody else gets to tell you what you're supposed to like. Everybody gets to pick what they do with their own body. And there are no exceptions to that. You can't do things to other people's bodies. You can do things to your own. Things to other people's bodies, you need to have their permission to do. The second thing I want to make sure that everybody knows is that you're normal. Whatever you're experiencing with your sexuality, it's the result of your sexual response mechanism functioning appropriately in an inappropriate world. That's a quote from a sex educator whose name is Emily Nagoski. I love her. She's awesome. She has 2 TED Talks. She has a book called Come As You Are and a workbook that goes along with it. And if you are struggling or if you want to know more about healthy sexuality specifically for females, because that's what she specializes in, I highly recommend looking her up. But realize that as we go through life, we have things that happen to us that shape who we are. We have things that happen to us that shape what we like and what we don't like, that shape our fears, that shape the things that we're attracted to. And those aren't abnormal unless you're doing something that's hurting yourself or others, and that can be emotional too, or unless you're doing something that is against your own moral standards, not something that's defined by your church, not something that's defined by your family, not something that's defined by anyone other than you. It's okay. It's okay for you to be exactly who you are. And it's really important to be able to realize that your responses, your fears, your emotions are all valid. Your responses make sense if you look at them in context. The things that we do, the things that we feel, the things that we think, they make sense if you look at the context around them. And that's really important to be able to take the shame out of trying to process through any of our sexual responses. Emily Nagoski uses a metaphor, and I promise I won't be quoting her the entire hour. She is awesome. I recommend you look her up. But the metaphor that she uses for sexuality is a garden. And she says, when we're born, we each have this plot of land that we just have because we're born. And when we're small, we don't have the ability to be able to take care of that garden ourselves. We don't know enough about it. We are pretty helpless and dependent on the people around us. So we have other people who tend our garden, who put the seeds in it, who pick what's there, who pick how it's being cared for. And as we grow up, we're able to take control of that. Sometimes we don't realize that we are, and sometimes we still give other people permission to tend our garden. And sometimes we have people who throw seeds in our garden that we don't ask for. And a lot of times that culture can put seeds in our garden that we don't ask for. Society, church, families, people that we're connected to. And so as any garden, we have weeds that grow. And we need to be able to learn how to pick and choose what we want in our garden and what we want it to look like. And as we're working towards sexuality, healthy sexuality, it would be claiming back our garden and being able to figure out what we want to do with it. So the arousal template is something that a lot of times I think professionals will use as a phrase, and a lot of people don't understand what it is. Your arousal template is what you want to. And it has to do with your beliefs about what's important about sex, the things that are attractive or arousing to you. It's basically the things that have happened to you, the things that you've experienced, and they help you shape what you are aroused by. It's not bad or good, it just is. It's just information. And as we're able to look at that and say, well, why do I not like this? That can be an important part of being able to sort through your sexuality and be able to look at it without shame. If there are things that are part of your sexuality that you really don't want, if they feel broken to you, then I would recommend that you work through that by yourself or with a therapist, but realize that they all make sense in context, that everything that you're experiencing comes from somewhere. So it's important to recognize that there are two parts to our sexuality and to arousal in general. And this was developed back in 2007 by Jansen and Bancroft. And they talk about there being an accelerator and a brake. Most of us are familiar with cars, so I think that this metaphor is pretty easily accessible to most people. The accelerator are the things that turn us on. They're the things that make us want to be aroused, make us want to participate in sexual interactions, want to participate in romantic interactions, want to connect to ourselves, want to connect to other people. The brakes are things that tell us, stop, don't do this. This isn't safe. This doesn't feel right. I don't want to do this. I don't feel comfortable with it. Now, this can be as benign as something like being annoyed by the dishes in the sink. It could be having a child knock on your door. It could be having your phone ring. It could be that you're anxious about something that's happening the next day. It doesn't necessarily have to be something connected to sexuality, and it's not bad or good, it just is. Being able to heal your sexuality, one of those things is learning what pushes down on your accelerator. What makes you actually want to participate in connection to yourself and possibly in connection to, or in sharing that connection with others. But the other half of that is just as important, which is learning what puts your brake on, what makes you not feel comfortable with it. What are the things that you need to do to create safety? What are the things that you need to do to just be able to connect to yourself and not be distracted by things? As you're able to combine those two different aspects of it, that will help you to be able to work towards sexuality in the way that's right for you. So my presentation is about being able to heal sexuality after abuse or betrayal. So I'm going to talk just briefly about what abuse is and what betrayal is. Specifically, because we're talking about sexuality with this, I'm going to talk about sexual abuse. In general, abuse is a power dynamic in which a powerful person, keep in mind this could be a child or an adult, forces themselves upon a less powerful person. So sexual abuse is when that power dynamic includes sexual components. That doesn't mean that the other person necessarily has a power dynamic around us in regular interactions. It means that they had a power dynamic around us in those interactions. I also want to, I forgot to say this at the beginning, realize that there may be things in this presentation that are triggering for you. And I would highly recommend that if you do get triggered by them, that you do something to process it out. So whether you write it down, whether you talk about it with a friend who's trustworthy, whether you talk to your therapist about it, if you have emotions that come up as a result of this or realizations that come up as a result of any of the things we talk about tonight, it's okay to lean in and look at those things. And it's really important to get the support that you need around that as you take those steps. So specifically around sexual abuse, it can be touching you or making you touch yourself or somebody else without your consent, and realize that a child does not have the ability to give consent to adults or to children who are, I think it's more than 3 years older than them legally. That is something that they cannot do. So even if you were consenting, it is still sexual abuse if you are more than 3 years younger than the person who made you do that. And it can also be people who are the same age or even people who are younger than you, but realize that it really is abuse even if you thought that you had consented to something where you had to touch yourself, or somebody else touched you, or you had to touch somebody else. Making you watch sexual acts, making you read anything that's sexual, that includes online stuff, and watching sexual acts includes online as well. Exposing you to sexual material without your consent, and realize that can be exposing children to porn. And you can experience abuse whether or not the person who is abusing you means it as abuse. A lot of my clients will have pretty significant trauma from having, or things that they've learned that have shaped their core beliefs from having found like their dad's porn stash in the closet, which granted in today's day and age with computers and phones, I don't know how many porn magazines are under the bed or in closets anymore. But when I was growing up, that was mostly where they were kept. And when I talk to people about my age or older, they'd talk about having found their dad's porn stash or their grandpa's porn stash or something like that. Breaching your privacy boundaries with or without your knowledge. So that could be watching you, that could be photographing you, that could be filming you, that could be sharing pictures of you. If somebody shares pictures of you, even if you gave them the picture and they don't have your permission to be able to share that, that absolutely is abuse. And it's also important to recognize that not all abuse comes from adults or even older children. Children absolutely can abuse other children. And understanding that that child was probably abused before they abused you does not mean that it didn't affect you in the same way. It does not negate the effect that it had on you. It doesn't change the emotions you have, the way it shapes your life, the way it shaped your sexuality. It doesn't change the seeds that it put in the garden, if we go back to the metaphor from the beginning. And that's important to recognize, that somebody doesn't have to mean to abuse you. Somebody doesn't have to be 100% good or 100% bad. Usually in this case, it would be 100% bad to be able to actually abuse you. Abuse can happen even if the other person didn't mean to do it, even if they didn't know that it was wrong, even if they were abused, it still can be something that you experience. So being able to validate that and work through that on your own is important, or work through that with a therapist. Sexual abuse in relationships can include manipulation to participate in sexual activities, which can include threats. If you don't do this with me, then I'm going to go find it somewhere else. If you don't do this with me, this is going to happen to you. Threats are manipulation, and that means we're having to do something we haven't agreed to. Not honoring our boundaries, or not even allowing us to have boundaries. A lot of times, the domino effect is something that comes up with this. For clients, it's if you kiss me, if you start making out with me, okay, you have to finish what you started. No, you have the right to say no at any point in the process. And being able to say you don't get to touch me, being able to say, no, I'm not comfortable with this, or we need to stop here. If someone has not allowed you to do that, that is sexual abuse. And again, I'm not trying to bash the person who did it. I'm trying to give you the ability to understand and see the way it may have affected you, and give you permission to be able to take the steps to heal from that. Groping or touching without permission goes along with not allowing boundaries. If you feel uncomfortable with something that somebody is doing to you and you ask them to stop, or you move away from them, or you didn't give them permission to do it in the first place, that absolutely is sexual abuse. Refusing to stop sexual interactions. If you tell somebody to stop, I don't care at what point you're at. If you tell them to stop and they keep going, then that's rape. If you end up having sex, it is forced sexual interactions if it doesn't end up with intercourse. Also breaching boundaries without the other person's knowledge. Same thing with the last slide that I showed. That absolutely is sexual abuse. And this is just a super brief summary. If any of these connect to you, I would recommend talking to a professional about it, because again, this is a minute or two of the presentation. It's not something I'm delving into in detail. So if those apply to you, absolutely go to somebody professional to be able to work through that, or look for some information, books, things like that. So being able to look at how abuse affects sexuality, very often there will be shame that's connected to the abuser, whether or not they understand the shame. So it can be internal in them, and it can be something that they externalize onto somebody else. And victims of sexual abuse very often will carry the shame of their abusers. It's almost like it seeps off onto them. There was a video that I've seen where they set it up, I think it was somewhere in England, They had a guy who went and stood at a bus station, and he's standing there with a bunch of strangers, and he starts laughing and just keeps laughing to himself. And within 2 or 3 minutes, everyone at the bus stop is laughing. We absolutely can soak up emotions that are connected to other people. So if everybody else can laugh, realize that if you are abused sexually and that person is feeling shame inside themselves, or feeling anger, or feeling rage, or feeling guilt, or feeling fill in the blank, you absolutely can soak up those emotions as well. And those can be things that, even though they didn't start as yours, you can carry them with you until you do the work to be able to process them out. Those are basically weeds that have been thrown into your garden, things that have happened that have continued to grow and produce responses around, and you being able to free yourself from that is being able to realize that you have the right to be able to weed those out of your garden and to be able to get help if you need to do that. A lot of times we'll have shame and guilt over our own physical or emotional responses to our abuse. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. And so I'm not going to delve too much into it here. Early exposure to sex, our brains can't make sense of the physical reactions we have in our body. Our bodies are built to be able to respond sexually. That's just the way that we're made. We have physical reactions, we have emotional reactions to things that are sexual, and I don't care if you look at that spiritually, if you look at that scientifically, our body responds to sex. And being able to make sense of, oh, my body reacted this way, if you have that reaction and at the same time you have shame that you, because of the experience and because of how early you were exposed to it, those two things can be linked. And that can be really, really hard to be able to sort through on your own. Sexual abuse also can teach us that emotional vulnerability isn't safe. It could teach us that the only way to connect is through sex, that we're never going to be valued for ourselves, that every single thing that we do, the only thing that people will value us for is sex. It may teach us that that's the only thing that other people care about. It may teach us it's the only way to get attention. It's the only way to feel connection. It may teach us that sex is about control instead of about connection. And again, any of those, it's not bad or good if you have any of those core beliefs that have become part of your belief system, but being able to sort through that is important. And if you struggle to do that on your own, I recommend talking to a therapist or a professional about that, just to be able to have additional tools and steps to sort through that. So in the last slide, we talked about shame over the physical and emotional responses that we have to sexual activity. So arousal concordance, big word, basically means that there are two different parts of sexual activity. One is genital response, the other one is desire. So genital response is our body responds in different ways. And desire is I actually want to do this and I'm connected to it. Realize though that desire can even have, we can feel the genital response and think that we desire it. That doesn't mean that we actually wanted it. And arousal concordance is when both of those things intersect. So we have a genital response and we have the desire to do it. So we get turned on and we want to actually participate in sex. Arousal non-concordance is what happens when you have a response from your body, but the response from your body does not actually coincide with what you really want. There is a phrase that is pretty common that is the body is more honest than what you say, and that is complete BS. It's not true. The body will respond to a lot of things. Again, we're trained, not trained. Our bodies are made to produce sexual responses. And if that means that any sexual stimulus can produce a response in our body, and that doesn't mean that we wanted it. And it doesn't mean that we're giving people permission. It doesn't mean that we want to continue it. Being able to recognize that is an important part of recovering from being able to heal sexuality when you've had abuse in your history. Because being told, oh, I wanted it, you wanted it because you did this and this and this, or your body did this. No, that's not true. And arousal non-concordance can include orgasm or ejaculation. It can be all the way up to those responses. I've had a lot of clients who went through rape or sexual abuse and said, well, I must have wanted it because I had this response. That's not true. It is not true. Even if your body responds, that does not mean you wanted it. It does not give somebody permission. So that's an important concept to be able to understand when you're sorting through abuse. I mentioned briefly that shame was connected to it. Shame means that there's something about me that's broken and wrong that is intrinsically unfixable. I'm broken, instead of, okay, like there may be something that I don't necessarily love about myself and I want to work to change it. Or maybe there's something that's natural that makes sense in concept or context. We can beat ourselves up all the time for things that are supernatural and absolutely make sense with the things that we've gone through. Also, with shame around sexual needs, a lot of the time we will be taught objectification of self or others. Society teaches that. You go look at magazine covers and you can see it all over the place. Look at movies and the body types that they very often pick to be able to play those roles, the way that they dress the people in movies, actors on pictures or posters. We absolutely have been taught to objectify. And when we're taught to objectify, I'll talk about objectification in just a minute. That's the next slide. But family of origin can also give us messages. Maybe you're not worthy of connection. Your needs don't matter. You only exist to meet your partner's needs. Sex is evil and disgusting and you should avoid it. All of those things put shame into our sexual arousal template. And they attach that. Being able to detach that is an important part of recovery. And realize, again, the shame to our physical or emotional responses to abuse, it's really hard to distance ourselves from that, to be able to say, no, I didn't ask for it, I didn't want it, just because my body responded that way. And again, this is super brief. If you're struggling with this, I highly recommend going and talking to somebody about it in a lot more detail. Objectification is when we see someone as an object instead of a human being. And when we see them as an object, we don't see them as a person. We can't connect to them. We don't see that their emotions and needs are valid, which means they can't say no. They can't tell us what they want and don't want. And a lot of times we'll blame them for something. Objectification is something that prevents us from being able to connect to ourselves and connect to other people. So really briefly, what is betrayal? Because if we're covering betrayal and abuse, betrayal would be the next thing on the list. So betrayal is a violation of a person's trust and of their confidence. This can be any type of betrayal. For the purpose of tonight's presentation, I'm talking specifically about sexual betrayal or romantic betrayal, because that affects your sexual template more so than most other betrayals do. And so betrayal trauma, which is partner betrayal trauma, was trademarked by Douglas Weiss. And it is, he says, it's a unique form of trauma. It occurs within your relationship. So it's caused by your significant other, your partner. And it's when you trusted them and they broke that trust. You have trauma as a result of that. And he breaks it down into 6 different areas. You may have some or all of these as a result of the betrayal that you have experienced if you have been betrayed. So you might have been betrayed emotionally, spiritually, socially, physically, sexually, financially. All of those areas will affect our ability to be able to feel safe to connect to somebody else. And very often they can make us doubt our ability to connect to ourselves. We can wonder what's wrong with us. We can wonder why we felt that way, why we stayed with them, why they betrayed us to begin with. And so the effect of betrayal on sexuality, gaslighting is one of the things that we see very often with betrayal, which is where somebody tries to make you feel crazy in order to distract from what they have done or are doing, so that they don't have to tell the truth or own what they've done. So gaslighting can make us question our own reality. It can make us question, and this can happen whether or not we knew about the betrayal. You can say, well, okay, was I really crazy about this? Maybe it was, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe he or she really doesn't want me because of this and this and this, and I don't deserve to be wanted or loved in that way. Or maybe there's something wrong with me that I want sex this amount of time, or fill in the blank. We can also be ignored, mocked, or rejected for our sexual needs or desires. And we can be blamed for the betrayal. All of those things can affect our sexuality. We can question whether or not our needs and desires are valid. And we can absolutely question whether or not they're safe to have. So if we're looking at healing sexuality, we start with emotional safety. We move, and emotional safety helps to build trust. Trust allows us to move towards connection. So with emotional safety, it's recognizing that you can say no, recognizing that you have the right to have the needs that you have, and that you have the right to your own body and what you want to do with it. Trust happens when someone else responds to our boundaries and honors them. And trust, I'll use the equation, trust equals behavior over time, and realize this can happen in a bunch of different areas. So we could trust that somebody will be able to listen to us and respond when we say no. We can also trust that somebody won't. And if somebody won't be able to listen to us when we say no, then we need to set up additional boundaries around that so that we can stay safe, because we can predict that that's how they're going to respond. Once we have trust built, we can start moving towards connection. Connection is being able to interact with each other, to share parts of ourselves emotionally and possibly physically in a way that's safe for both of us. And connection is built as we continue to develop the trust, because someone will respond and honor our boundaries. We'll be able to honor ourselves and to be able to say, oh, well, I do want this, I don't want that. And it will be okay for us to have the emotions and the feelings that we have. And if somebody has an emotional reaction to it, they'll be able to own their own emotional reaction, process it, and take the steps that they need to be able to express it and to work through whatever the issues are with us. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't have sex. Sex absolutely is an important need. And it helps to meet the need to be chosen. It helps to meet the need to be wanted, to be desired, to be enough. It also meets physical needs. However, sex absolutely, like pretty much anything else, can be problematic. It is problematic when it's misunderstood. So if we believe that sexual acting out behaviors, that our addictive behaviors are actually meeting our sexual needs, then that's a problem. And sexual acting out behaviors can be defined as behaviors that help us escape rather than help us connect to ourselves. They numb us or help us escape emotions, because sex is one of the deepest forms of connection that we can feel. So being able to heal sexuality, having healthy sexuality, would be being able to connect to ourselves. If we are leaning towards behaviors that are helping us to escape from ourselves and not to be connected to ourselves, then that would be an addictive behavior. Not necessarily bad or good. If you're betraying somebody you're in a relationship with, or if it's causing you problems within your life, then obviously that's going to be something that is unhealthy and you should respond more quickly. But other than outside of that, it would be recognizing, oh, this isn't being connective. Let's work on it and figure out how I can connect to it myself. Sex is also problematic when it's overused. It is not the answer to everything. It is not the end-all be-all of existence. That doesn't mean it can't be amazing. It just means it is not the answer to everything, and that we can survive. Without it, we can have our needs met in other ways. And it can also be problematic when it's misused, when it doesn't matter what's costing ourselves, when it doesn't matter what's costing someone else. Very often that's connected to addictive behaviors, whether it's an addiction or whether it's just misuse of sex in this case. And anytime that we're talking about any type of addiction, it would be misuse of the substance or the process. In this case, it's a process addiction. That means it's a behavior instead of a drug that we put inside our body. So with healing sexuality, the 5 steps that I usually have my clients work through. First, it's claiming the trauma. Second, it's healing the trauma. Third, it's redefining language. And I'll go through each of these in just a minute. So this is just a really brief overview. Fourth is self-image and body issues. And fifth is self-exploration. And that does not mean what you think it means. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So with claiming and acknowledging, understanding the trauma, you can't heal something if you don't know that it's there. And that doesn't mean you have to understand every single part of it. For example, if you break your arm pretty badly, you might go to the hospital, go to a doctor, get an x-ray. They'll be able to say, oh, this bone and this bone is broken. You're not going to know everything about each of the broken bones. You're not going to know how to be able to fix them. But you can go to experts who can help you with that. And they can help you say, oh, okay, well, this part is broken. We're going to have to shift it into this. This is what it did to the rest of your arm. This is what it does to the muscles around it. That's the same thing with emotional trauma. So sometimes we need to go to experts if we can't work through it on our own, or possibly we just need to go to experts just to get some additional tools as we work through it. If you've had abuse in your childhood, adolescence, or in your primary relationship, I do recommend talking with a professional about that, whether it's all three or any combination of it. Additionally, it's important to be able to understand what gaslighting is, to be able to understand when that's happened to us and how it's affected us, to be able to see when we're being gaslit and how our body responds to that, and to be able to figure out how to stay grounded in that. Understanding manipulation, ways that we may have been manipulated into doing something that we didn't necessarily want to do, something that we really don't want to do, something we're not comfortable with. That all affects us. It gives us trauma. And being objectified by others or by ourselves. We can objectify ourselves. I have clients on a pretty regular basis who work through the belief that, for example, if they age, that they aren't as good as aren't as valuable as they were when they were younger, because younger bodies are usually what we see as on magazine covers, on movies, TV shows, but our worth isn't defined by that. But if we objectify ourselves, or if we have others objectify us, that can cause us trauma. It can make us believe that we're not worth connecting to on our own. Sexual abuse or harassment absolutely are traumatic, and being able to sort through how that shaped our understanding of ourselves and our ability to connect to ourselves is important. We talked earlier a little bit about the domino effect. The domino effect is when if you do something, then it has to do, everything else falls into place. Like if you tip over a domino, all the rest of them keep going. If you kiss somebody, if you make out with them, even if you start sex with them, it does not mean you have to complete the act. It doesn't mean you have to continue. If you feel uncomfortable, you can stop it at any point. And being told that you don't have the right to do that absolutely is traumatic. And sorting through the way that that may have affected you is important. Another area that's really common for sexual trauma is punishment for boundaries. We're told, well, if you do this and this and that, or if you don't do this, then this is what I'll do. Or if we do this, then this is what I'll do. That tells us that we're not allowed to have boundaries. We're not allowed to have needs. We're not allowed to have emotions. And being told that that invalidates us. That tells us that we're not important. And so that's important to be able to work through the trauma around that. Understanding that this is trauma that happened to you is the first step. The second step is being able to heal that trauma. Sometimes we can do this work on our own. Sometimes we need some help from others. A lot of times I will have clients who will be able to work through a lot of this in their step 4s and step 5s of their 12-step programs. And you can attend 12-step programs even if you don't have an addiction. You could go to Al-Anon or Codependence Anonymous. Those are usually pretty good ones for people who don't necessarily have addictions that they're struggling with, but where they're trying to sort through things that happen to them, faulty core beliefs that they have. Working with a therapist is something I highly recommend. I know I'm biased, so take that with a grain of salt. I have my own therapist, and I will continue to work with her probably until one of us dies or she retires, because I love her and find it super helpful to be able to have somebody that I can talk to about and process through things and have somebody see things in those lights. As you're working to heal your trauma, there are specific modalities that have been created to work with trauma. EMDR is one of those. That a lot of times tapping is something that's connected to EMDR, and it's alternating the sides of your brain that are being activated. So while you're processing through trauma, it helps you to be able to sort through it. EMDR was originally created for PTSD with soldiers, and then they started using it on rape victims. And we now use it on a lot of different traumas. Somatic experiencing is another type of trauma work that you can do. You would need to go to somebody who is a somatic experiencing practitioner. Brain spotting is something else that there are therapists who are trained in, and that's somewhat similar to EMDR in that it helps you to be able to access trauma and to process through it without the filters that we put on ourselves. Post-induction therapy is a form of trauma treatment. Psychodrama is another one. And talk therapy can just be used to process through trauma. Parts work is something that I have found really helpful with clients working through trauma. So the way that I usually use that in this area is being able to figure out what the sexual part of you would be like. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a sex kitten or fill in the blank. It would be what what is the part of you that connects to your sexuality? And that would be connects to yourself, where you're able to see and process some of the things that have happened to you. And I've had clients, I had one client who talked about, as she was exploring this part of herself, she talked initially about it basically being like kept in a closet and not allowed out because she wasn't allowed to think about it. She wasn't allowed to talk about it. And anything that was sexual was considered dirty and wrong. And when she entered into her relationship happened to be with an addict. And so she was told that her wants and needs weren't valid and that she had to like this other approach to sex, which he had learned through his addiction. And as he worked on his recovery and she worked on her recovery, she was able to claim that part of herself and to have that part of her come out of, well, in this case, it wasn't, it was the sexual closet, but not coming out of the closet as in coming out as gay. But it was able to come out of hiding and it was able to actually be part of her and incorporate into herself so that she could access that part. I had another client who, when she was working through her parts work, she realized that because of the abuse that she had gone through as a very young child, part of her that was getting the sexual messages was the child who had been abused. It was the part of her that was that age. And so we actually did a session where we had an envelope that was empty and she had gotten, I think, a flirtatious message. It wasn't even it wasn't an overtly sexual message. It wasn't anything inappropriate, but she had gotten a flirtatious message from somebody and she was able to have the child part of her that received it was sitting there with the envelope, and then the older part of her that was the sexual part of her was able to say, oh, this one's for me. And she actually traded her a coloring book for the envelope and was able to say, no, like it's just not your mail. It's the message isn't for you. And then she got, that part of her got to figure out what to do with it. She didn't have to accept it. She didn't have to read it. She could throw it out. She could decide to read it. She could decide to respond to it. We have the ability to choose what we want to do with our sexuality, and that's really important. And parts work very often can help us to be able to divide our reactions and then figure out what we want to do about it. I very often have clients write a sexual trauma impact letter, and that would be how I've been impacted, how my sexuality has been impacted. And that's very similar to like a 4th step, 5th step, and 8th and 9th step, if we're talking about trauma that we may have caused other people. That would come up in your 8th and 9th step and might come up in your 4th step and your 5th step as well, if you're doing 12-step work. But if you're not part of a 12-step group, you can sit down and you can write an impact letter. You can say, this is how I was affected. These are the things that happened to me. Just being able to own that. You don't have to necessarily share that with anybody. You can share it with somebody who's safe. You could share it with a friend. You could share it with your partner. You could share it with a therapist, but you get to pick who you share this work with. You get to pick what's right for you. Nobody else gets to define that for you. Additionally, it can be helpful to create a timeline. This is what happened to me. This is when I was first exposed to sex. These are the things that I learned about it. These are the things that happened along the way. And a therapist can help with that if that's something that you want to do. A sexual trauma egg is another tool that I often have clients use, which is you just draw an oval on a piece of paper, and then you draw a little circle within the oval and just put one little picture. Don't have to be an artist. A lot of times it could just be stick figures or a teeny tiny little picture, but you'll draw a picture of a memory that represents that trauma. So it's a timeline, but it is a timeline in a pictorial format. And so some clients will connect to that better. If one of those things is something that connects to you, great. If it isn't, you can go talk to a therapist. And if you have a hard time processing through the emotions that come up with any of those, I would recommend talking to a therapist about that specific issue. So with redefining language, a lot of times our life attaches different meanings to different words. And that's true with anything. And that can differ based off of parts of the country that we're in. Something as simple as, so if I have a can of Diet Coke, if I'm in New England, I call it a soda. Now, I think that quite a few other people, I grew up in New England, so to me that's soda, but I know other people call it pop and some people call it Coke, whether or not it's Coke or Dr. Pepper or whatever. There are all sorts of names that we have for that. Well, that's also true with sexuality. And sometimes different words within that language can trigger us. Sometimes those are crude words. Sometimes those are just basic words that are part of it. So being able to understand, oh, I'm super triggered when I hear that word. And then you can figure out whether that's something you need to replace or whether that's something you need to redefine. So replacing, there are words that are super easy to be able to replace, especially slang words around sexuality. There may be some, if a lot of my clients who have been betrayed and who have addicts as partners, and that's been part of their betrayal, may be super triggered by words that might have been part of porn or part of acting out sessions, that it's just words that they don't want to hear because it reminds them of a different type of attitude, a different type of approach. And that's okay to say, nope, I really don't want to use that word. I would recommend that you look at redefining words that would allow connection. So for example, the word sexuality, we're not going to be able to come up with a great word that redefines that. The word sensual, that's one that I've had most of my groups work through. If you look at the word sensual, it actually is talking about being able to use your senses. And as you use your senses, being able to connect to those. So sensual activities don't necessarily mean that they are sexual activities. They are activities that connect you to your body through your 5 senses. And once you recognize that you can connect to your body and it doesn't have to mean whatever, fill in the blank, the message that you've gotten from society that connecting to your body has to mean X, Y, and Z, then it can allow you to be able to heal and to be able to connect to yourself. Because if you're going to beat yourself up for the things that you are wanting, the things that you don't want, that attaches shame and it prevents us from being able to heal, and it prevents us from being able to lean into the things that push on our accelerator and also reduce the things that are pushing on our brake. Because if you have your foot on the brake, the car's not going to go anywhere no matter how hard you push on the accelerator. So that's important to be able to differentiate between those two and redefine the words that you would need to be able to redefine in order to connect to yourself. Self-image and body issues are often a very huge, they are affected hugely by sexual abuse or by betrayal. And a lot of times we can feel like we're not good enough. We can feel like we caused it. We can feel like if only we were skinnier, sexier, taller, had red hair, had brown hair, had blonde hair, wore heels, fill in the blank. And those were all things for females. So, well, I guess shorter or taller would be, could be either gender or non-binary. But recognize that we could say, well, if only I was X, Y, and Z, then maybe this wouldn't have happened. That's not true. So self-image and body issues, the key to happiness around those, it's twofold: confidence and joy. And confidence is knowing what's true. This is who I am. This is what I like. This is what I don't like. And joy is loving what's true. Being able to accept yourself in your body, being able to learn to love yourself as you are. You are beautiful. You are amazing just as you are. And knowing that, being able to learn that, to be able to incorporate that into our hearts is a really important part of being able to connect to ourselves and our body. Why would we want to connect to something we hated? Why would we want to connect to something that we despised? Why would we want to connect to something that wasn't good enough in our brains, that says, when our brain says it's not good enough? We wouldn't. That's not something that we'd be able to enjoy connecting to, and it's certainly not something we would want to share with somebody else and feel like they would want. So being able to develop the ability to know what's true about ourselves and then to also love what's true about ourselves is a really important step in healing sexuality. These are a couple of resources, and I will provide the entire PowerPoint. After this, I don't know if I sent it to Daniel. I'll also post it on my website. So if you want to relook at these, you don't have to frantically write them down. You're also welcome to take a picture of it if you want. But these are some suggestions about self-image and body issues. So self-exploration. Self-exploration does not mean forced masturbation. Self-exploration means that you're going to take the steps to get to know yourself and your body. You're going to figure out what you need in order to be able to be safe with that. Some of my clients only want to be able to explore that part of themselves with their partner. Other ones don't feel safe to explore it with their partner at all. And so being able to sort through, okay, I only want to do it within these confines, within these boundaries. This is what makes it safe for me. Great. I don't get to define that. That's not my job, and that's not your job to define it for anybody else. recognize, though, that as we form our boundaries, that they may be affected, or they may affect the people that we're connected to. So I would recommend not doing self-exploration with someone outside your primary relationship unless you have discussed that with your partner and figured out what your boundaries are around that first. So that would be my one caveat around this. But what you're trying to do is connect to yourself to figure out what feels good to you emotionally, what feels safe to you, what pushes on your brake, what pushes on your accelerator, to be able to pay attention to both of those things, to validate them, to be able to lean into them, and to be able to choose what you want to do about them. Being able to make the choice to move forward in the ways that you want to is really important. And to me, the biggest part of healthy sexuality is claiming back your right to be able to decide what you want to plant in your garden, what you want to take out of your garden, how you want to be able to cultivate it. So just to review emotional safety, we talked briefly about this earlier. Your emotions and your needs are valid. You have the right to have boundaries and enforce them. And make sure that you set up plan Bs. And plans Bs are, if this happens, what am I going to do? So for example, if we start sex and all of a sudden I get triggered by it, then how are we going to respond to that? Talk about that before it happens. Think about it for yourself, come up with an answer, but then also talk to your significant other, whoever you're participating in the sexual activity or romantic activity with. Realize you can always say no, any point of the process. That doesn't expire. You are able to have a say over what you do with your body. Nobody else gets to tell you what to do with it, and you can't do things to other people without their permission as well. As you start being able to connect to yourself and to your body, and possibly choose to share that with someone else in a way that's connective to you and that is safe to you and safe to them, realize it's about the process. The goal is not to have sex. Now, that doesn't mean that can't be the way it ends, and that doesn't mean it can't be something that you choose to do. But the goal is to develop and to deepen the process of connecting to yourself and to someone else. You have to believe and enforce. You have control over your own body. You have control over your emotional safety. And the other person has the right to that too. And so enforce means that you have the ability to be able to stand up and leave even if they don't like that. And that doesn't mean you don't work through that with them and you don't say, hey, that really made me unsafe when I tried to get up and leave and you told me that I wasn't allowed to and you got mad at me for it. That doesn't make it feel safe for me to continue. But you have to have the right to be and the ability to walk out of the room. You have to have the ability to be able to stop in order for it to be safe. You're going to have a really hard time feeling safe if you don't have the capacity to be able to stop when you want to and to be able to control what happens with your own body. Being able to understand and express empathy can be an important part of the process. Understanding the other person's experience, being able to ask questions, and this doesn't mean that you're going to have to do something that they ask you to do. It doesn't mean that they have to do something that you ask them to do. It means you're talking about, oh, okay, well, this is something that I would like. Well, that makes me feel this way. And then you can process through what would be best for both of you. You're exploring your experience. You're exploring your needs. And being able to share that with somebody else would be being able to explore your experience and needs in the context of a relationship. But you have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to verbalize your needs throughout the experience, to be able to say, okay, I want you to move this way, or could you do this, or this would feel better, or I just don't feel comfortable. Could we stop and talk for a while? Or I'd like to move faster. Being able to communicate throughout the process is really vital. And also responding to the other person's requests in a way that honors both of you. So you're not just giving into something that somebody says, but you're being able to listen and you're being able to say, okay, that's a valid need. Let's figure out if there's some way that we can meet those needs. Being able to communicate and empathize with each other, to verbalize your needs, will make for a safe, connective process. And as you run into hurdles with this, you absolutely can consult a professional if you need to around it. There are certified sex therapists that can help you to be able to work through any problems around this. And also, if it's talking about the emotions connected to it, a lot of therapists will be able to talk about that. They don't have to be a certified sex therapist necessarily to process through the emotions. I would find somebody who has been able, has gotten training to be able to help you process through abuse or betrayal, specifically if those things happened and are part of your story. So going back to the metaphor from the beginning, it doesn't matter what you want your garden to look like. You are allowed to decide and design what you want your plot to look like, whether it's small and has lots of flowers like the one in the top left corner, or whether it is based around what looks to me like sort of, I don't know, an Italian lighthouse or something. Whether it's more secret, whether it's more open, whether you want flowers, whether you want vegetables. You get to pick what you grow in your garden. And as long as it is not hurting yourself or others emotionally, physically, mentally, psychologically, and as long as it's not going against something that's illegal or something that is incongruent with who you are, you get to define what this looks like. And so this process is being able to say, okay, let me figure out what I want in my garden, what I want, what I don't. Let me learn to be able to take out the weeds, learn to be able to figure out what flowers or what plants I actually want to grow and how to cultivate those, how to pick out the weeds that somebody else has put in, how to be able to choose and design the shape, the structure. It's yours. This isn't anybody else's garden plot. You get to pick what you do with it. So if you have any questions or would like the PowerPoint, you can go to either one of those websites. I'll make sure it's posted on there within the next 24 hours. You're also welcome to call or text me. My phone number is on the screen. My email is on the screen as well. And I will send the PowerPoint over to Daniel as well. Or to D2. I don't know if it's Daniel or if it's somebody else who does that. And I am open to questions. Let me stop sharing this.
So for the email, or excuse me, for a copy of the PowerPoint or for CEUs, just write to email info@D2counseling, and that will get, we can get either one of those taken care of for folks.
Any questions?
I was working with a couple one time, and they were really having trouble just even talking about their sexuality with each other. It was really a struggle. And I asked them, I asked them to go to Condoms to Go and spend $20 each, and they had to go together. And the woman's response was really fascinating. She said, there's no way we could do that. Only perverts go there. And I thought, well, okay, well, that's interesting. I said, so we began to talk about it a little bit. And as she talked through it, what it finally got reduced down to was a pervert was somebody that had sex any different than she did. And when those words came out of her mouth, we all started laughing at the time. And it just released all the energy that was tied up in her fear about considering anything that wasn't in her realm of reference. And it was a good experience for me to just begin to even look at my own thoughts around sexuality and what my norms are, what my template's about, and to just take a step back and recognize that not everybody thinks the way I do about stuff. Not really a question, just an observation. Here's a question for you. What if one of the spouses is not interested in sex, even after years of therapy?
So usually if there's a discrepancy in sexual desire, I recommend working with a certified sex therapist around the discrepancy. If you're looking for books at home, that would be, I would look at Come As You Are and the Come As You Are workbook. Additionally, trying to think, I want to say Bear Claw, but that's not the right name. Do you remember, Danielle, do you know who I'm talking about? There's a book, and I'll put it on my website. Oh, I think I may have it at home. But it's by a couple, and they talk specifically about being able to get back into the bedroom and connect to each other.
Somebody wrote in the chat, Doctors Burkhoff.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Carla.
Other questions or comments? Well, Laney, I'll ask you, is there anything that you meant to talk about or wanted to reemphasize before we let everybody go?
I will probably remember at midnight tonight. Right now, nothing's coming to mind other than making sure that you realize that you're not broken.
Yeah.
That everything makes sense in context. So if you feel like there's something broken around sexuality, then I absolutely would look at the context as how that developed.
Yeah, you know, one of the things you talked about, I think it was early on in the presentation, if I understood you right, you said there was a reason why everything, I think you were referring to sexual template, that something was behind that. And that was a new concept for me too, when I was first exposed to that idea to look at that, because I didn't realize that template was formed someplace else.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there was a comment in the chat that said, so sexless marriage absolutely can be considered legally as grounds for divorce. I would look at being able to validate your own needs and your partner's needs, though. To me, that would be emotional. It wouldn't, you are not required to do anything with your body, but I would look at why you would or wouldn't want to be connected to your partner, and why your partner would or wouldn't want to be able to be connected to you in that way, and if it feels safe for both of you. So to me, there would be a whole lot of emotions behind it. I'm not a divorce lawyer, so I'm not going to look at it as legal grounds. I would look at the emotions behind it. And John, are you asking for key steps for the recovery of a betrayed spouse, or were you saying that those are key steps for recovery?
Well, again, Laney, I'm going to thank you again for presenting tonight. It was delightful. I enjoyed the presentation, learned a lot, and thank you for it. So if anybody would like more information from Laney, feel free to reach out to her directly. If you need to go through us to connect with her or get her contact information, I'm always happy to do that. But thank you all for attending tonight. If you need the CEUs, just reach out to us and we can deal with that. And with that, I will wish everybody a safe week and a profitable week and a peaceful week, and invite you back next month when we continue the lecture series on the third Tuesday of each month. And so with that, I'll sign off and thank you all for attending tonight.
Thank you for the opportunity, Danielle.
Yes, ma'am.
She has a question. She raised her hand, but then she went off. So, okay. Thank you.
Okay. Be well.
You too.